Okay, that last chapter was pretty intense. Let's see where that takes us in this chapter. Chapter 17. Skid Row felt forlorn as they drove through the streets, the fresh wind and overcast blowing in, making it feel even more so. They headed in the direction Jason and Daisy had gone. They argued whether or not they had made any turns, Jordan claiming she saw at least 2 on the live stream. Tom was adamant they had gone straight, and Nick couldn't claim to know either. Because Tom drove, he chose his own advice and continued straight. Thus, they had to double back when they began to exit Skid Row. "I told you," said Jordan as Tom spun the car around. "Don't pretend to know what you're talking about," said Tom. Nick thought the same statement held true for Tom, but chose not to point it out. The problem they faced now was they still didn't know where to go, and were also going backwards. A gas station on an adjacent street caught Nick's eye. It had a bright yellow awning with streaks of black dirt crisscrossing all over it. He thought he remembered it on the video and said, "I think they went that way." He second-guessed himself almost immediately, knowing he'd gone through Skid Row a lot since moving. He thought he might have seen the gas station on a previous trip and not the video. He had to wonder if he hadn't just taken them off course. He tried calling both Jason and Daisy for the millionth time, only for both phones to go straight to voicemail. "Damn it, Daisy," said Tom to the windshield. "Where are you?" Nick felt the same sentiment. It was like wandering in a maze that went on for miles in every direction. They caught their break when Jordan spotted an ambulance crossing an intersection a quarter mile ahead. Tom sped up to get there, arriving just in time to glimpse the ambulance turning onto another street. By the time they reached that corner, they were doing well over double the speed limit. Nick couldn't help but worry that another pedestrian might step out in front of them. Would any of Tom's subscribers recognize his car? "There it is," said Jordan, blurting as they turned the last corner. The red flashing lights caught Nick's sight. There were 2 ambulances on the scene and 1 cop car. Roughly 30 or 40 bystanders were all grouped around, blocking the view inside the circle of emergency vehicles. "Can you see Daisy?" Tom asked as they parked the car on the curb. Nick stretched his neck to try and see better, but the crowd made it difficult. "I can't see anything from here," he said in frustration. Tom threw open the door and jumped out, as did Jordan. Nick found himself left behind in an empty car, struggling to get the seatbelt off. By the time he got out, the others were already merging into the crowd. As Nick took his first step to follow, dread filled his chest. It felt as though an invisible force pushed him backwards. Every tiny step he took resisted, like walking into a hurricane that nobody else could see. What would be on the other side of that throng of people? Body parts? Broken bones? He wondered if it would have him scarred and changed for the rest of his life. As he got closer, the force pushing him back only grew. A silence lay beyond the crowd that he wanted nothing to do with. Why wasn't there any screaming? If it was such a bad accident, shouldn't they be screaming? Nick entered the crowd and felt comforted by the low murmur of the gossiping people. "She just stepped into the road," one whispered. "They didn't even stop," said another. Nick slid by the 2 and finally caught back up to Jordan and Tom. They were at the front of the crowd, and the scene lay before them. "It's like a deer," said Tom. Jordan scoffed. "Have some respect." "That's a joke coming from you," he replied. Nick stepped up next to them and winced. There was a wide streak of blood in the pavement, leading to where the woman's body lay. Her yellow dress was now stained and torn, revealing the ghastly wounds underneath. The first responders were in no rush as they checked the woman out. That's how Nick knew she was dead. "Where's Jason and Daisy?" Nick asked. Tom gave them a look that said, "Shut up." Jason must have run from the scene, no doubt because he was drunk. "Hey," Jordan snapped, "don't even start with that." "I'm not starting with anything, just stating the obvious," said Tom. Nick watched as they covered the woman with a sheet. He felt thankful because the sight of her was beginning to make him want to throw up. Jordan crossed her arms and huffed. "You don't know what you're talking about, and if you want to keep running your mouth, I'll educate you and everyone else here." "I know what I saw," said Tom. "Did you?" asked Jordan. "Did you see one guy drive off by himself, cruising down the road without a care in the world, completely in control? I saw an erratic adulterer on his way to destroy more people's lives." "Do you think she felt pain?" asked Nick, his eyes on the human-shaped sheet. Both Jordan and Tom stopped arguing to eye him. Finally, Jordan said, "I hope not." "What does it matter?" asked Tom. "Either way, she doesn't get to live because of your friend." Nick felt a wave of anger wash through him. "We know for a fact he wasn't driving, Tom," he said. Tom winced. "I already told you. He would have pulled over and switched seats." "No," Nick replied. "There's no reason to think that. You're being irrational." "Me?" said Tom in amazement. "I'm not the one caught under his spell." Nick shook his head. "It's the only thing that makes sense." Tom laughed. "Nonsense. Jason has your head all twisted, and I don't understand why. Was it the money or the girls? Did he say you'd be able to live in a house like his one day?" "Doesn't make sense that you think they stopped," Nick insisted. "There wasn't enough time before the live stream started, and at no point during did the camera show them pull over." "There was plenty of time," said Tom. "Excuse me." They both turned to see a cop standing before them. Nick swallowed hard and tried to act casual. He glanced at Tom, who did the same. "Would you like to shed some light on what happened here?" asked the cop. Nick started to speak, but Tom cut him off. "We just got here." "Is that so?" said the cop. "That's a shame, because I was hoping someone could give me something." "Sorry," said Tom. The cop didn't budge. "You know, both of you look familiar. Are you on YouTube?" "Yes," said Nick. Tom cleared his throat. "We have an exercise channel that helps people get in shape." "Really?" said the cop. "And that's all both of you do? Exercising stuff?" Nick's mouth felt dry, and he knew he would give anything to be able to sink back into the crowd. "My channel's mostly exercise. Nick here's a blogger," Tom corrected. The cop's eyes slid from Tom to Nick. "Oh, so he does workouts, and you, what, film yourself walking around?" "I guess so, yeah," said Nick. "Do you ever film with other people, or just with yourself?" "He's done a few videos with me," Tom cut in. Without looking away from Nick, the cop said, "So just you and this guy, then?" "I film with all kinds of people," said Nick. The cop nodded his satisfaction, then said, "How about Jason Cross, Nick? You ever shot videos with him?" Nick felt stunned, then managed to say, "Yes, sir." That's when Tom spoke up, louder than he had before. Is there a problem here, officer? Only that I'm getting reports about a live stream being filmed in the lead up to this accident. The culprit of that stream being the ever-popular Jason Cross, said the cop, meeting Tom's glare with his own. Now imagine my surprise to turn around and find one of Mr. Cross's known associates at the crime scene. We had nothing to do with this, said Nick. The cop gave him a cold stare. Someone did. Are you aware of what happened here today? Nick stammered. He wondered if he was in trouble, or if he could make things even worse for himself. We don't know any more than you, said Tom. The cop shot him a glance. I'm not talking to you. When the cop's attention came back, Nick felt the pressure, felt himself shrinking. This felt bad. If the law didn't destroy them, the court of public opinion would. I don't know, said Nick finally. I live just up the road. We spotted the flashers and decided we'd drive down here and see if there was anything we could do to help. I'm sorry if my presence is distracting you. The cop went silent and apprehensive as he continued to stare Nick down. Are we free to go? Tom asked. Or is there a reason you're detaining us? Without turning away from Nick, the cop said, You're free to go whenever you want. Then have a good day, Tom replied. He put one hand on Nick's chest and urged him to fall back into the crowd. Nick did just that and felt happy to be moving away. One last thing, said the cop, halting their retreat. There's a warrant out for your friend Jason's arrest. If you see him, you be sure to let us know. With pleasure, said Tom, then continued guiding Nick and himself away. Once on the outside of the crowd, Nick realized that Jordan was missing. He stood on his toes to see if she was still at the front of the crowd, only to discover she wasn't. Well, that was exciting, said Tom, completely unperturbed by Jordan's absence. Nick continued to search around, ignoring him. He began to think she might have run off. It was beginning to sprinkle, putting a chill in the air that hadn't been there before. Nick's clothes weren't soaked through yet, but he knew if they stayed out much longer, they would be. This is why you don't associate with bad people, Tom was saying. Nick walked away from him, saying, Save it. He finally found Jordan on the far side of the ambulances. She was talking to a woman with a dirty tank top draped in dreadlocks. As Nick walked up, he realized Jordan was holding her phone out between them, recording. She must be doing an interview, he thought, pausing his advance so he didn't interrupt. I was sitting over there, the woman said, pointing to a tent set up on the side of the building. I could hear the engine of the car before I ever saw it. I think that's what got that girl's attention, you know? She was ready for it. Do you think it was suicide? Asked Jordan. The woman shook her head. Nah, we see that car coming by here all the time. She knew who it belonged to, some big shot YouTuber. I think she just lost her head, thought she could get him to stop, maybe put her on camera, you know? The woman shrugged. Sometimes all it takes is one appearance on a celebrity's social media. Who knows what that could do for you? Okay, said Jordan. How far out in front of the car would you say she was when she stepped into the street? The woman thought for a moment, then said, Far enough for the car to see her and stop. I think the drivers might have been texting or something. You know, distracted driving. They say it's just as bad as being drunk. Did you see the drivers texting? Asked Jordan. No, I wasn't paying that close attention. I just knew they had plenty of time to stop. Okay, said Jordan, slipping her phone back into her pocket. Thank you for the statement. No problem, said the woman. Say, could you mention my Instagram in your story? It's Mistress Myrtle. Could you mention my Instagram in your story? It's Mistress Myrtle. Sure, said Jordan. and Nick could hear the annoyance in her voice. She spotted Nick a moment later and came over then. Here, car. All right. She spotted Nick a moment later and came over. Then together they went and found Tom. He stood by himself next to his car on the phone. When she saw Nick and Jordan, she waved them over. "Let's go," he said. "Daisy's at home." With that, they climbed back into the car and headed out of Skid Row. The whole ride, Tom cursed out Jason, and Jordan typed into a text document on her phone. Nick did his best to drown Tom out and look out the window. He wondered what would come next for Daisy. How much trouble was she in? Would they lock her up? The view leaving Skid Row always gave him solace, but not today. The mood in the air around him, the sinking feeling stayed even among the better scenery. This made him long for his bed, to pull the covers over his head and deny this day had ever happened. There was no sign of Jason's car when they pulled into the driveway, and when Tom got out, Daisy burst from the front door and leaped into his arms. "Please," she sobbed, "forgive me." Tom wrapped his arms around her and kissed the top of her forehead. "It's okay. I'm here now." Jordan moved to Nick's side and gave him a troubled look. Nick didn't know what to say, so he put his arm around her. It was the only comfort either of them could find. "I'm so sorry," Daisy continued. Tom brushed her hair aside and kissed her forehead. "It's okay, baby. We'll get through this. I forgive you." Jordan rolled her eyes so only Nick could see. He wanted to smile in return, but knew he could never muster it and let the effort go. Nick found the rest of the encounter tedious and awkward. It felt hard to have a conversation with Daisy bawling, whilst she and Tom were fully consumed with each other. It didn't take long for him to decide to get a lift home. Jordan agreed, and they were soon riding back through the city. Their mood was somber, and neither Nick nor Jordan talked. Nick's chest felt heavy as they rode along. The light rain on the windshield matched his feelings. He wondered where Jason had gone after dropping Daisy off. He was probably alone somewhere, if not in jail. Nick had to find him. He could only imagine what Jason was going through. The Lyft driver dropped them off in front of Nick's house, then sped off into the fading light. "Are you going to be okay?" Jordan asked when they were alone. Nick tried again to force a smile, but it felt awkward, so he let it go. "Yeah, I'm good," he thought for a moment, then added, "It's not like I'm the one who just killed somebody on live stream." She moved into his arms and kissed him lightly. Nick closed his eyes and allowed the feeling to cloud out his other thoughts. He wanted to kiss her more, harder, but he knew he wasn't up for it and allowed the kiss to fade. "None of this is your fault," said Jordan, lifting his chin so he was looking into her eyes. "They should have never been able to hang out in the first place," said Nick. "If I was a good person, I would have told them off." Jordan kissed him one more time, then said, "You're a good person, Nick." They stood there for a while, comforting each other as the lights faded around them. When the dark finally settled, it was time for Jordan to go. She reluctantly left him standing alone in the shadow. Nick stayed there. He didn't want to move, to do anything. He just watched the sky counting the stars as they appeared. They were few in the light of the city, but they were there. "Hey," called Jason, bursting out from a bush on the edge of his property. Nick almost fell over from the fright of the unexpected appearance. He had to stumble just to keep from landing on his backside. "I didn't think she was ever gonna leave," Jason went on. "What are you doing here?" Nick asked. Jason gestured back towards his house. The cops are looking for me. You ran a woman over, said Nick. Then you left her to die. There was nothing we could do, said Jason. She came out of nowhere. We hit her so hard, she was dead before she hit the ground. You should have stopped, Nick snapped. Jason ran a shaking hand through his hair. No, nobody knows Daisy was in the car, and it's going to stay that way. Trust me, Nick, that woman was already dead. What do you mean? Everyone knows Daisy was in the car. You live-streamed it. Jason shook his head. They only heard her voice, and I will deny it was her. That can't hold up. It will. It has to. But Daisy was in the car, said Nick. She was the one driving. Jason stepped closer and put his hand out as though he wanted to cover Nick's mouth. You don't know what you're talking about, he said, looking all around like a caged animal. She wasn't there. Everyone needs to know that. She wasn't. It's the truth, Nick insisted. You don't have to cover for her. Jason turned to his house, then back to Nick. I'll turn myself in. Tell them it was all me. Her face was never on camera. They're going to recognize her voice, said Nick. That could have been anyone's voice, Jason insisted. I'll deny it was hers. If nobody else talks, she'll be safe. Jason, Nick began. Jason cut him off. You have to promise me you won't say anything. I can't, said Nick. Promise me, Jason repeated. Nick took a heavy breath, then said, Fine. But you don't have to do this for her. She went back to Tom. You don't owe her anything. Okay, good, said Jason, seemingly in his own thoughts. Yeah, that's good. Where are you going? Nick asked when he realized Jason was walking away. Jason didn't turn around, but said, I have to turn myself in. It's the only way to keep her out of this. Another one bites the dust. We're getting down there. That far to go. Crazy, crazy. Until next time, crazy.